Have you ever felt like something's watching you from the trees? A forest that seems peaceful by day can become a terrifying place by night. These are stories that'll make you think twice before entering the woods again. A true tale until now. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another chilling story. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell. This is just the beginning. I want to start by saying, I'm not someone who easily buys into paranormal stories. I love horror, don't get me wrong, it's exciting and fun when it's just in movies or books. But experiencing something unexplainable? That's a whole different level. I've always leaned towards logical explanations. Sure, I've heard stories from people I know, things they swear happened to them. But I've always thought, there's gotta be an explanation. That's how I saw it. Until this happened. This story takes place on New Year's Eve, in the southern region of Brazil. My family and I were on vacation. Me, my younger sister, my mom, and my dad. We decided to make the most of the summer weather by exploring some hiking trails in a neighboring state. The place is famous for its lush forests, steep hills, and a rich history tied to early indigenous tribes and the colonial period. It's a beautiful area, but the historical weight of it? That becomes important later. Before we even left for the hike, I felt this strange nervousness in my chest. I chalked it up to my fear of heights, something I've dealt with since I was a kid. I only agreed to go after my parents promised there wouldn't be any steep drop-offs visible on the trail. They assured me it would be fine. The hill we were hiking was steep, about 500 meters tall, and the trail stretched for around 5 kilometers. It sounded manageable, especially since my parents were experienced hikers. My mom being a nurse and my dad a former military officer. I thought, what could go wrong with them around? We arrived at the trailhead around 4 p.m. The air was humid, the kind that clings to your skin, and the forest was alive with the chirping of insects. At first, everything was fine. We were chatting, laughing, and enjoying the fresh air. But as we moved deeper into the trail, I started feeling off. First, it was just dizziness. Then, nausea. My whole body began to ache like I'd been running a marathon, even though we'd only been walking for a short while. My parents noticed, of course, but my dad, being the stubborn and proud man he is, insisted we press on. You'll feel better as we go, he said. I wanted to believe him. Around the halfway point, things took a turn. My sister was leading with my dad, while my mom stayed behind with me to keep an eye on how I was doing. That's when she suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. I turned to look, but before I could see anything, she pushed me forward. "Keep moving," she muttered, her voice trembling. Her behavior rattled me, but I didn't question her. She started saying things like, "We're protected," and "everything will be fine." Her words didn't comfort me, they scared me. My mom isn't someone who gets shaken easily. She's seen some horrifying things as a nurse. For her to act this way, something was definitely wrong. And then there were the noises. Rustling in the bushes, strange beeping sounds that didn't belong in the forest. We spotted an opossum once, but that was the only animal we saw. The rest of the forest felt eerily empty. We finally reached the peak around 5:30 p.m. The view was breathtaking, but none of us could enjoy it. My dad urged us to start heading back down. He didn't want us caught on the trail after dark. The way down was faster, but it was far from easy. My sister and dad started bickering about her pace, while my mom kept urging me to move faster. The rain began to drizzle through the canopy, and the forest came alive with new sounds. Whistling, almost like someone trying to call us. My dad brushed it off as birds, but I wasn't so sure. As night fell, we had to rely on our phone flashlights. The arguments escalated, and I felt like the forest was pressing in on us, watching us. Then something magical happened. Fireflies appeared. They were rare in this region, yet here they were, glowing softly around us. One even landed on me, and I couldn't help it. I started crying. But the relief was short-lived. As we approached the final stretch before a bridge that led back to the road, my mom stopped dead in her tracks. I followed her gaze and froze. There, in the middle of the trail, was a figure. It crouched low, completely black, without any discernible features. It wasn't just dark, it seemed to absorb the light around it. Even with our flashlights, it remained a void, standing out against the illuminated trees and ground. My mom whispered for my dad to shine his light on it. The moment he did, it vanished. We didn't waste a second. We sprinted toward the bridge, our breaths loud and panicked. Only when we reached the highway did I finally ask my mom what she had seen earlier. Her answer chilled me. She described an indigenous man, pale and thin, wearing a mask made of banana leaves and straw. But the mask didn't resemble anything from the local tribes. She said he had been walking toward us, and she had heard whispers mingling with the forest's strange noises. Other odd things happened too, like my sister clapping at one point and hearing a clap back from the forest. Or the time a giant black moth flew straight at my face, only to vanish into thin air. Even now, I can't stop wondering what we experienced that day. Was it the land's history manifesting in some way? Something else entirely? All I know is, I'll never forget that hike, and I'll always be a little more cautious when walking through the woods. Let me take you back to 1998. I was about 13 years old, living in a large city with my dad and older brother. Life wasn't easy back then. Money was tight, and my dad always seemed to be battling some new problem. But what really stood out from that time wasn't just our struggles, it was the woods behind our house. Those woods had a reputation, and not the good kind. You see, we lived next to this fenced-off, heavily wooded area behind a YMCA. It wasn't just any woods. These were infamous. Over the years, people had found bodies there, victims of the city's violence. It was a place everyone avoided, especially at night. But as a kid, curiosity gets the best of you, doesn't it? Our neighbor, a deeply religious woman and a close friend of my dad's, believed the woods were cursed. She told my dad that all the violence and tragedy there had left a stain, a demon, she called it. My dad, being the superstitious man he was, believed her. He made it clear that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere near those woods. Of course, I didn't listen. During the day, I'd sometimes cut through the woods as a shortcut to a friend's house. But even in broad daylight, there was something wrong. The trees seemed to block out more light than they should, leaving the ground below in shadows that felt unnaturally dark. And it wasn't just the darkness, it was the silence. Except for the occasional rustle of leaves, the woods felt too quiet, like they were holding their breath. At night, forget it. I only dared to step foot in there once after the sun went down. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, the faint crunch of leaves behind me when I knew no one else was there. I ran so fast that night, my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst. It felt like the woods were alive, like they were reaching out to pull me back. Things started getting stranger after that. It began with nightmares. Almost every night, I'd dream about a thick black fog creeping out of the woods and swallowing everything. I'd try to run, but no matter how fast I went, the fog would catch up, dragging me into the darkness. I'd wake up sweating, gasping for air, and it felt like the dream had followed me into the real world. My dad noticed something was off. He was convinced that we were being spiritually attacked, as he called it. He blamed the demon in the woods. I thought it was just his paranoia, fueled by our neighbors' stories. But then one night, something happened that made me question everything. We were sitting in my dad's old, beat-up Volvo, parked in the driveway. I don't even remember what we were arguing about. It was probably something stupid, like most arguments are, but we were going at it, yelling back and forth. At one point, my dad said something that stuck with me. He said, "Every time we fight like this, we're feeding that thing in the woods." I laughed at him, mocked him even. I remember saying something dismissive like, "Oh, come on, you really believe that?" But before I could finish my sentence, we heard it. Bang. The trunk of the car shook. It felt like fists pounding against the back of the car, harder and harder. My dad and I froze. For a moment, neither of us could speak. Then, as the banging got louder, we screamed. I don't know what came over me, but I threw my arms around my dad and cried, "I love you, I'm sorry." He hugged me back and said the same, over and over like a chant. And as we kept saying those words, the pounding slowed. The hits became softer, quieter, until finally, they stopped. We sat there in stunned silence, tears streaming down our faces. Eventually, my dad got out of the car to check the trunk. When he came back, his face was pale. He didn't say much, but I saw the dense, dents shaped like fists, ones that weren't there before. After that night, things changed. My dad refused to talk about what happened, shutting me down every time I brought it up. We moved not long after, leaving those woods behind. But I couldn't forget. Even now, years later, I live just a few miles from those woods. Sometimes, late at night, I feel tempted to go back to see if I can find proof of what I experienced. But the fear always wins. Something about those woods still feels alive, like they're waiting for me to step back inside. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Growing up, life wasn't exactly easy. My parents' divorce had left a permanent mark on me. My mother, trying to piece her life back together, decided we'd move in with her friend who had also gone through a divorce. They thought it would be easier to share a house, split the bills, and lean on each other for support. So, at 11 years old, I found myself living in a strange house with my mom, her friend, and her friend's teenage daughter, who was 3 years older than me. It was a tough time. I was the youngest, the only girl, and we were barely scraping by. My mom's struggles with alcohol didn't make things any easier. To top it off, the house itself, well, it was unsettling from the very beginning. The first thing that struck me about the house was how odd it was. Unlike the other homes on the street, this one faced the wrong direction. Its front door was at the back, and we had to use a long, dusty driveway to get to it. The main entrance led into the kitchen through what felt like the back porch. The house was 3 stories tall. The basement was unfinished, except for a washer and dryer shoved into the farthest, darkest corner. On the first floor, there was the master bedroom where my mom's friend slept, a single bathroom, a small computer room, the door to the basement, and the kitchen living room area. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. My mom and I shared one, and her friend's daughter had the other. From the moment we moved in, I felt uneasy. Something about the place just didn't sit right. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. It started with the basement door. It was latched to the wall, but not securely. Every so often, it would swing open on its own. The adults chalked it up to drafts or the house settling. But I wasn't convinced. I was sure there was something down there. Something watching. Whenever the door creaked open, it felt deliberate, almost like it was waiting for me to notice. If I was alone downstairs and heard that sound, my heart would race, and I'd run upstairs as fast as I could. As a kid, I was superstitious and had a vivid imagination. I started creating stories in my head about what could be causing the door to open. Was it a ghost? A spirit trying to communicate? I shared these stories with my friends at school. Of course, most of what I said was made up, but there were a few things, a few moments, that I couldn't explain away. One of the first things that made me think I wasn't imagining it happened to the other girl in the house. She didn't believe me when I told her the place was haunted. She rolled her eyes every time I brought it up, but one day after school she changed her tune. She'd come home early and decided to take a shower. The house was empty except for her. While she was in the bathroom, the one near the basement door, the doorknob started rattling violently. It wasn't just a casual jiggle. It was forceful, like someone was trying to break in. She screamed, thinking it was me messing with her. But when she opened the door, nobody was there. After that, she didn't laugh at my ghost stories anymore. I'll never forget the night I got the proof I'd been looking for. It started like any other evening. I was downstairs in the computer room, chatting with a friend on the phone. The door to the room was open, giving me a clear view of the hallway, and of course, the basement door. It was around 9 p.m., and the house was quiet. My mom and her friend were out, and the other girl was upstairs, passed out after a weed nap, as she called it. As I talked to my friend, I saw the basement door slowly creak open. I froze. My stomach twisted into knots, and I felt that familiar wave of fear wash over me. I quickly made up an excuse to my friend and bolted upstairs. But after a while, boredom got the better of me. My friend on the phone dared me to go back down and face my fears. "You've got this," she said, laughing. "Just tell the ghost to back off." Fueled by her encouragement and maybe a bit of stubbornness, I decided to confront whatever was down there. I marched down the stairs, determined to show the spirit I wasn't afraid. I started singing, What do you want from me? You know, the Adam Lambert song. I even threw in some trash talk. You can't scare me, I said, flipping the bird at the basement door. Looking back, I'm embarrassed by how cocky I was. But at that moment, I felt invincible. That is, until the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me out of my bravado. I turned to the back door, expecting to see my mom or her friend. But when I pulled back the curtain, there was nobody there. My heart pounded. The doorbell chimed again. This wasn't an ordinary doorbell. It played different melodies like Jingle Bells or other cheerful tunes. But as the chime echoed through the house, something else happened. A voice came through the speaker system. It was faint but unmistakable. A woman's voice, speaking gibberish. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but the tone, it sent shivers down my spine. I panicked. I sprinted upstairs, shouting for the other girl to wake up. She groggily opened her door, confused and annoyed. "What is it?" she asked. Before I could explain, the doorbell chimed one last time. She heard it too. Her eyes widened and all traces of sleep vanished. I told her what had happened, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely scared. After that night, I avoided the basement at all costs. A few more strange things happened during our time there, but nothing as terrifying as the doorbell incident. Eventually, my mom and her friend had a falling out, and we moved out. But even after leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had attached itself to me. I've had recurring dreams of a girl locked in a basement, pleading for my help. Psychics I've spoken to as an adult have told me there's a spirit connected to me. Whether it's true or not, I'll never forget that house. It wasn't just a place where I lived, it was a place where something unseen lived too.